The boarding pass was crushed between fingers trembling with anger. A slight flick, a sharp sniff, then a sentence cut through the air clean and hard, loud enough to freeze the atmosphere in a single breath. You think you're a doctor? Take a good look at yourself. The voice dropped like a blade. And in that moment, when the boarding gate was boiling with announcements, rolling suitcases and crying children, everything around Dr. Olivia Carter fell silent, as if the entire airport turned to stare at her, as if even the air decided to step aside in the face of such blatant humiliation. 1 second, but 1 second, was enough to flip the fate of 3 people, though the woman standing in front of Olivia Senior Flight Attendant Susan Mitchell had no idea. Olivia simply stood still. No reaction, no blink, no defense. That calmness made the situation far more dangerous. At John F. Kennedy Terminal 7 at 8:12 in the morning, the space was flooded with cold white light, sterile and emotionless, like a massive operating room. Passengers crowded toward Gate 31 to board NorthStar Airlines, Flight 214. Some hurried, some stressed. Some just wanted the long day to end. Among them, no one noticed the black woman, standing quietly at the end of the line, wearing a simple grey sweater, her hair tied back, no jewelry, no brands. No one knew they were standing next to the most powerful woman in the entire aviation group, a woman who could replace a CEO with 1 phone call, a woman who owned more than 51% of the company. She brought no bodyguards, no assistants, no entourage, clearing the path ahead. That wasn't her style. She chose to move quietly. She chose silence when walking into the company her father had built with his entire life. She chose to observe without letting anyone know she was observing. It was the only way to see the truth. Olivia Carter, 38 years old, PhD in organizational psychology, chairwoman of the board of Carter Aviation Group, the parent company that owned NorthStar Airlines. Yet at this moment on her boarding pass, she was just Olivia A. Carter Zone 3 seat 32B. And that was intentional. She wasn't here to be served. She was here to examine the fractures in the company culture, the kind that reports data and glossy executive presentations never reveal. For the past 6 months, Olivia had read hundreds of reports, curves, charts, percentages, all assuring that NorthStar was stable growing, managing costs well. But Olivia knew the truth was different. She heard the whispers, the anonymous emails, the late-night phone calls from employees, crying softly into the receiver. She felt the cultural decline. She saw the creeping arrogance. She heard the tiny cracks in the promise her father left behind. Respect, dignity, service, with a soul. All of it was being suffocated by numbers the executive team worshipped like scripture. And then Susan Mitchell arrived, carrying exactly the kind of toxin Olivia had been searching for. Susan approached like a doctor, inspecting an overcrowded emergency room, eyes sharp, jaw, tight shoulders, raised every movement, infused with the aggression of someone used to giving orders but not used to being challenged. On her uniform, Susan M. Senior Flight Attendant. A short smile, fake and crooked. Then a mocking laugh slipped out when she saw the title Doctor on Olivia's ticket. Dr. Hoshaw. She leaned toward the attendant next to her, smiling as if she had found a new form of entertainment. Someone thinks she's a PhD. Bet she's trying to get an upgrade. The words dropped like a hammer. People around them began glancing over their eyes, curious, judging, sizing her up eyes. Olivia recognized all too well the eyes of a society that constantly demands black people prove they deserve to be anywhere they stand. But Olivia didn't respond. She didn't change her expression. She didn't show emotion. She simply extended her hand to take the boarding pass back, a small gesture, but charged with a cold authority that made Susan hesitate for a heartbeat. A few feet away, the gate agent behind the desk, Mark Henderson, 58 years old, watched the scene with eyes full of dread. He recognized Olivia the moment she approached. He had worked under her father for 2 decades. He knew those eyes, that posture, that heavy, deliberate silence. Mark understood exactly what was happening, and exactly how catastrophic Susan's mistake would be. He tried to catch Olivia's eye, offering a small nod, an unspoken apology, a warning that he knew the truth and stood with her. Olivia returned the look calmly, her eyes saying, "Don't worry, I have noted everything, I will handle it." But not now, not in front of this crowd. She had a much larger plan. Susan, oblivious to the storm she was provoking, kept her smug smile. "Have a great flight, Doctor." She pressed each word with insult. She handed the boarding pass back with a light but intentional slap into Olivia's palm. A moment, a small vibration like a compass needle snapping true north. That was the moment everything changed. Olivia walked down the jet bridge without haste, without looking back, carrying the terrifying calm of someone who knew exactly what she was doing. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't threaten. She didn't reveal her identity. Because those who lose control always lose. Her silence carried more power than any shouting ever could. She stepped into the cabin, taking in the smell of aircraft plastic, the hum of ventilation, the click of seat belts. Seat 32. B was cramped, hot, uncomfortable, but it was exactly where she needed to sit to witness the sickness infecting the system. Around her, the other passengers were just accidental witnesses, unaware they had just watched the first minute of a complete corporate restructuring. At the front of the plane, Susan continued arranging items, smiling at other passengers with a fake sweetness. But to Olivia, every detail was data. Every glance, every tone, every twist of Susan's lips, each small moment built a larger picture, the picture of a cultural disease. From the back of the cabin, Olivia saw it clearly. Susan growing impatient with an elderly passenger, snapping at a black family, mocking a customer for asking a simple question, the junior attendant shrinking away afraid of her, a toxic chill seeping into the cabin. NorthStar Airlines was no longer the NorthStar her father built. The light was gone. The pride was gone. The heart of a company that once put people before profit was gone. Olivia understood clearly the sickness did not come from one person. It came from an entire system gasping for breath. And she wasn't here to witness it. She was here to cure it. She opened her old leather notebook. On the first page, field note NS-214. She wrote in sharp, decisive strokes, Incident 1, customer humiliation, at gate violation, type appearance, based discrimination, disrespect, toxic culture. Then she closed the notebook, leaned back and shut her eyes. She didn't need to say anything more. What Susan had done was the first domino. The rest would fall in rapid succession. And when the plane landed, none of them would know that the woman they had just humiliated would decide the fate of the entire team, including the CEO. None of them knew that a storm had boarded with them. A storm named Dr. Olivia Carter. Susan Mitchell stood in front of Olivia, the deep blue uniform, clinging tightly to the tense posture of someone accustomed to giving orders. Her half-smile was sharp as a blade, just enough to announce who supposedly held the power here. Olivia stepped into the cabin, still buzzing with noise and harsh light. But it was the silence in Susan's stare that was the most unsettling, a silence filled with judgment, contempt, and the certainty that the black woman in the grey sweater did not belong. Olivia took her seat in 32B, the cramped middle seat hands resting lightly on her knees. She could feel the weight of the glances around her, some curious, some indifferent, some simply unwilling to get involved. No one knew this tiny moment had the potential to tear open a gash in an entire system. Susan walked down the aisle with quick, harsh steps, adjusting the overhead bins with forceful pushes, as if venting her frustration on the metal. When she reached Olivia's row, she didn't look directly at her, only flicked her gaze across the seat before moving on, as if the middle seat were empty. Olivia noted every movement, each expression capturing it, with the sharp silence of someone familiar with power, but never careless with it. From the back of the cabin came the sounds of a crying child, the click of seat belts, and another flight attendant reminding passengers to stow their belongings. These were only background noises. The real story was the way Susan carried her tension and spread it row by row. She spoke to an elderly passenger with a snapping, impatient tone, addressed a black couple with cold detachment, and spoke to a white young man with a voice dripping with sweetness. Every sentence from her mouth revealed another crack in the airline's culture. At the far end of the cabin, a younger flight attendant, Grace, deliberately avoided Susan's eyes. The girl shrank back when she was lightly scolded for arranging the service cart incorrectly. Olivia watched how Grace bowed her head, her shoulders tightening worry etched across her face. It was not the fear of a demanding colleague. It was the fear of someone who had learned to survive in an environment where even a small mistake could become a reason for public humiliation. And Olivia understood, if a young employee had already learned silence, then the wrongdoing had existed long enough to become unwritten law. Olivia opened her bag and took out her leather notebook. The pages were crisp, but her pen strokes were firm and unwavering. She wrote down how Susan ignored passengers' requests, how she forced a small boy to stand closer to his mother when his little backpack wouldn't fit in the overhead compartment. Every line became evidence, each piece of evidence a steady heartbeat, signaling a sickness no report or spreadsheet could ever capture. A man seated nearby, broad-shouldered and curious, glanced at Olivia, trying to guess what she was doing. Olivia calmly closed the notebook. Her silence neither invited entry nor allowed anyone to control the narrative for her. She was here to witness, to confront the system's true face, to see exactly where the rot had spread. Susan returned once more. This time, her gaze lingered on Olivia, a heartbeat longer, not from guilt or shame, but from irritation at realizing Olivia was not reacting the way a so-called troublesome passenger should. Olivia did not shrink. She did not fear. She did not lash out. That calmness threw Susan off balance, like she was pushing on a door whose handle refused to move. Susan turned away with a sharp exhale through her nose, the kind that sounded like the hiss right before a pressure cooker explodes. Olivia closed her eyes. She wasn't tired. She was calculating. Each disrespectful remark, each tense breath in the cabin, each fearful glance from Grace, each icy tone from Susan, all became markers on a map. A map leading straight to the core of the problem, a culture that had shifted off its axis. And when culture shifts, policies mean nothing. When culture rots, the system collapses on its own. Susan had just added another point to that map. Olivia opened her eyes again, staring up at the cold white overhead light. She wasn't angry. She wasn't hurt. She was resolute, with the quiet finality of someone who knew exactly what was coming. Susan Mitchell had no idea she had chosen the wrong person to provoke, not wrong on a personal level, wrong on a systemic level. Susan Mitchell of NorthStar Airlines had awakened the very woman the entire company had forgotten, the one with the power to restore order. The battle had not begun yet, but Olivia had already written the first lines. And once this plane touched down, there would be no turning back. The service cart rolled down the aisle with a metallic echo sharp enough to cut through the cabin noise. Susan stopped exactly at Olivia's row, her forced smile hanging on her face like a loose mask. She served the window passenger first, then bent down to speak to the aisle passenger with a sweetness so exaggerated it sounded artificial. But when it was Olivia's turn, Susan looked straight through her, as if the middle seat were completely empty. "And for you." Her voice floated upward toward the ceiling, not downward to the person sitting directly in front of her. "Water, no ice." Olivia answered calm and even. Susan poured the water into a plastic cup and placed it onto the tray of the man beside Olivia. Olivia looked at the cup, not frowning, not complaining, only repeating with steady sharpness, "I believe that is mine." Susan turned back with a long sigh, as if she were being seriously inconvenienced. She picked up the cup and handed it to Olivia with a careless shove that sent the water rippling dangerously close to the rim. "Here. Yours." No apology. No acknowledgement of the mistake, just cold indifference. Olivia accepted the cup, feeling the thin layer of frost that was Susan's attitude right at her fingertips. She didn't react. She simply wrote in her notebook, "Incident 2, intentional neglect of passenger incorrect service, contemptuous behavior." She closed the notebook. The air around her grew heavier. Not even 30 minutes later, the meal cart arrived. The entire row ahead of her was asked, "Chicken or pasta?" Susan's voice was soft as velvet, even though it was just mass-produced airplane food. But when she reached Olivia, Susan didn't ask. She placed a tray down with a decisive thud. "Pasta." Olivia looked Susan directly in the eyes. "If there is still chicken, I would like the chicken." Susan tilted her head, narrowed her eyes, and responded in a cold, dismissive tone, "There is no more. Pasta is the best I can offer you." It was a blatant lie. Olivia had just watched Susan give the last chicken tray to a student by the window, without even asking his preference. A small, warped version of power, petty but toxic. "Thank you," Olivia replied with a voice free of emotion. She did not argue, not because she cared about the chicken, but because what she wanted was not the meal. It was an accurate portrait of the cultural sickness eating this airline alive. She wrote again, "Incident 3, dishonesty in service, deliberate removal of passenger choice, dismissive attitude." She closed the notebook, leaned back, and listened. At the back of the cabin, Susan was talking to a colleague. Her voice no longer bothered to maintain the minimal professionalism expected of flight attendants. "I am telling you, economy is full of people trying to act important. Like that woman in row 32. You should have seen her ticket. Doctor, seriously." A small laugh escaped from the junior attendant, but it trembled with worry. Susan loved spreading her venom, confident that no one in these so-called cheap seats could hear her or would dare to respond. But someone was hearing her, and that someone had the power to end her career in a single meeting. Olivia stood and walked to the galley to get more water. She arrived just as Susan was talking to the purser, Ryan Blake. the person with the highest responsibility in the cabin. Ryan attempted a half-hearted laugh. "Come on, Susan. Only a few more hours until we land." "It's not about a few hours," Susan replied. She looked at me like I owed her money. I just made sure she understood her place. Olivia stepped in. No sound, no warning. The air dipped by a degree. She spoke to Ryan with a low, sharp voice. "I would like some more water, and I want to make it clear that mocking passengers inside the cabin is unacceptable." Susan turned toward her, ready to fight. "Are you complaining?" Her voice dripped with challenge. Olivia looked at her steadily. "I am recording what I observe." Ryan awkwardly stepped between them, trying to smooth things over with a weak tone. "Let's not escalate. This is probably a misunderstanding." "There is no misunderstanding," Olivia said, pronouncing each word with such precision that Ryan froze. He chose to step back, and with that choice, he silently stamped his name into her report cabin. Leadership ineffective failure to address misconduct, enabling toxic behavior. Back in her seat, Olivia felt the tension tighten around her like a string pulled taut. The passengers nearby didn't know what was happening, but they sensed something serious building like the sky before a storm. Susan avoided Olivia entirely after that. No service, no questions, not even a glance. But that no longer mattered, because Olivia had seen enough. Enough to know the airline her father built was rotting from within. Enough to know the respect that once formed the soul of NorthStar had become an empty shell. Enough to understand that once the plane landed, a cultural purge would begin. Susan Mitchell believed she had just won a small victory over an ordinary passenger, but Susan had no idea of the truth that mattered most. She had just opened the door for Olivia Carter to see the real sickness. And Olivia never ignores a sickness. The rear cabin dimmed as the lights shifted into nighttime mode. The space grew quieter, but the quiet was not peaceful. It was the kind of silence compressed from a series of small, toxic actions, thin sparks waiting for the right wind to ignite into a full blaze. Olivia rose from her seat and stretched her legs. She walked down the aisle with absolute calm, approaching the aft galley, where 2 flight attendants were leaning against the metal counter talking. As she drew closer, Susan's sharp voice cut through the ambient hum of the engines clearer than anything else. "I told you that woman in row 32, pretending to be a doctor. Doctor what? Bought a cheap economy seat and thinks she's somebody, purser." Ryan Blake tried to maintain a neutral expression, but his eyes betrayed the familiar weakness of a man who had let Susan run unchecked for far too long. "Susan, stop it. What if a passenger hears you? If she hears it even better. At least she'll know exactly where she's sitting." Susan spoke as if Olivia were an object, not a person, as if passengers were not people to serve, but inconveniences to shut down. Olivia stepped into the faint light of the galley. Both attendants fell silent at once. Susan straightened, folded her arms, and flashed a challenging smile. "Do you need something?" Miss Carter Ryan's face drained of color. Olivia met Susan's eyes, not angry, not flustered, carrying only the heavy silence of someone accustomed to real power, the kind that does not need to raise its voice to be heard. "I would like a glass of water." The simple sentence tightened the air around them. Ryan hurriedly grabbed a cup. "Of course, let me just—" Olivia did not look at him. "And I want to clarify something." Susan folded her arms tighter, ready to strike. "Oh, so you want to complain?" "No," Olivia replied. "I want to confirm that what I heard is correct." Ryan began to sweat. Susan let out a mocking laugh. You're too sensitive. This is an airplane, not a therapy room." Olivia did not react to the insult. She simply looked at Susan with the precision of a surgeon, the kind of gaze that makes a person suddenly realize they have revealed too much. "I'm questioning your professional standards," Olivia said, her voice low but sharp as glass. "You refer to a passenger as that woman. You mock their title. You speak poorly of customers while standing in front of your superior and still believe it is acceptable. Do not tell me I am not doing my job." Susan snapped her voice, rising. "I have been doing this for 20 years. I know exactly who belongs in which cabin. One sentence, one posture enough to expose the core of the issue, not just with Susan, but with NorthStar Airlines." Ryan stepped between them, his voice trembling. "Come on, let's calm down. It's a night flight. We're all tired." Olivia turned to him, without a hint of pity. "You heard everything, and you did nothing. You stood here watching your staff insult a passenger. You chose silence. And you call that doing your job?" Ryan bowed his head, breathing unevenly, unable to look her in the eye. Olivia took the glass of water from his hand, then delivered the final sentence, crisp and cutting, chilling the galley by another degree. "This is not a misunderstanding. This is a failure in service culture, and I am documenting it fully." Without waiting for a response, she left the galley, her steady steps becoming their warning. Back in her seat, Olivia opened her notebook. The blank page waited. Her pen moved quickly, firmly. Incident 4, Purser witnessed misconduct and failed to act, clear sign of cultural decay, leadership incapable of correcting issues resulting in toxic behavior spreading through the team. She closed the notebook. The cabin felt tense and motionless, like the first scene in a film where the audience can sense the villain is about to face a heavy reckoning. Olivia stared ahead at the dim rows under the soft overhead lights, not triumphant, not self-satisfied, only carrying a silent certainty, like a storm forming without sound. She had seen enough to conclude, enough to act. When this plane lands, it will not be Susan or Ryan deciding the outcome. It will not be the crew. It will not be the airport manager. Olivia will decide. With the power they never realized had been sitting in economy for 6 hours. Susan Mitchell believed she held the upper hand, but that was only because she failed to see the truth standing right in front of her. Olivia Carter was not a passenger. She was the verdict. The dim cabin light cast a soft glow across Olivia's composed face as the plane began its descent. The gentle chime sounded. Passengers sat up to gather their belongings, but within that space, an invisible tension thickened. It didn't come from the vibration of the aircraft or the exhaustion of a nighttime flight. It came from the moment when every toxic action would finally meet its consequence. Olivia opened her eyes as the wheels touched down on the Heathrow runway. The light jolt felt like a period closing the first chapter of her observation, and immediately a large question mark formed over the futures of the people who had confidently insulted her throughout the flight. Susan stood at the front of the cabin, her artificial smile adjusted to perfection, ready to send passengers off with her usual controlling gaze. But that sense of control wavered the moment Olivia stepped into the aisle. Susan saw her, folded her arms, lifted her chin as if she still held some sort of authority. Her eyes said clearly, "You are just an economy passenger. I am not afraid of you." Yet as Olivia approached the aircraft door, Susan's world collapsed in a single breath. Outside the plane there was no line of passengers waiting as usual. Instead, 3 people stood there, tension visible in their eyes. The CEO of NorthStar, Ethan Caldwell, in a dark grey suit, his face pale. The operations director at Heathrow, standing slightly behind him with clenched hands. And finally, Mark Henderson, the elderly gate agent from John F. Kennedy, the man who had silently witnessed everything. They said nothing. They didn't smile. They didn't greet her. They stood like a disciplinary council, waiting for the exact second to execute a judgment. Susan froze, blinking rapidly. She looked from one person to another, trying to make sense of the strange scene. She looked at Mark, then the CEO, then back at Olivia, desperately trying to assemble pieces her mind was now refusing to process. Ethan took a step forward. "Dr. Carter." His voice cracked on the very first syllable. Olivia stopped in front of him. Not cold, not angry, just the heavy presence of real power. Mark bowed his head slightly, his voice rough with worry. "I am so sorry for everything that happened. I saw the whole thing. I couldn't let you face that alone." Ethan turned to Susan, his face shifting from pale to green with fury. "Susan Mitchell," he said, his voice tight with restraint. "Do you have any idea what you have done?" Susan forced a twisted smile, trying to stay calm. "I was just doing my job. If there was a misunderstanding." Misunderstanding Ethan nearly exploded. "You referred to the chairwoman of the board as that woman in row 32, and mocked her doctoral title. In that instant, every drop of colour drained from Susan's face. Her mouth opened, but nothing came out. She turned toward Olivia with absolute shock in her eyes. She remembered every laugh, every mocking comment, every dismissive glance. And only now did she realize she had destroyed her own life with the casual cruelty she routinely threw at passengers. Ryan Blake stepped forward from behind his face, turning ghost white when he heard the word chairwoman. He instinctively stepped back, as if hoping the dim cabin lighting would swallow him whole. Olivia looked at both of them. No rage, no vengeance, only a disappointment so deep it chilled the air around her. "Respect," Olivia said, "slowly is not a privilege. It is an obligation. And what I witnessed on this flight is the complete decay of that obligation." The air cracked like thin glass. Susan began to stutter. "I didn't know, I had no idea you were." "No," Olivia cut in. "You do not need to know who I am in order to do your job correctly." Ethan swallowed a hard breath, then turned to the airport operations director. "Immediate suspension, confiscate their security badges, escort them to the supervision room." Susan burst into tears, collapsing like a building whose foundation had been pulled away. Ryan stepped back again, face burning with shame. Olivia exited the plane as though no storm had just unfolded behind her. She didn't need to shout. She didn't need to humiliate anyone. She didn't need to display power. She was power. The CEO hurried after her, nearly running to keep up. "Dr. Carter, I have prepared a special conference room at the London office. We will contact the entire executive board in New York. I will do anything you require." Olivia kept walking, eyes forward, steps steady. Her silence was the answer, and it made everyone in that jet bridge feel like they were walking beside a living verdict. Mark stood behind, watching her with pure respect. He knew he had just witnessed the beginning of something monumental, a cultural purge NorthStar had needed for years. Susan Mitchell had believed she was dealing with a difficult passenger. But the truth was this: she had confronted the future of the entire corporation. And that future had no mercy. Olivia Carter walked on, emotionless, unwavering. And with nothing but her quiet presence, NorthStar Airlines was about to be rewritten from the ground up. The air inside the NorthStar London conference room was as thick as an unfinished fire. The long wooden table, the polished black leather chairs, the large screen mounted on the wall, all the luxurious details suddenly felt meaningless when compared to the presence of the woman sitting at the head of the table. Olivia Carter placed her leather notebook on the surface, her eyes sweeping once across the pale faces on the video call from New York. 6 vice presidents, the head of flight services, the director of human resources, and the corporate culture chief, all present, all painfully aware that what had happened was not a customer service issue. It was a cultural ceiling collapse. Ethan Caldwell sat beside Olivia, back stiff hands locked together, as if afraid any movement would worsen the situation. He had been CEO for 15 years, yet never in his life had he felt this small. Olivia opened her notebook without even looking at it. "Let us begin." Her voice did not rise, yet it froze the room instantly. Each word weighed more than metal. "I spent 6 months reading your reports. Every one of them had the same theme: beautiful indicators, rising charts, numbers presented neatly like a freshly polished aircraft." She paused, her eyes cutting across the screen like a blade. "But the company culture is rotten." No one dared exhale. Olivia turned to the first page, her voice steady, sharp, unwavering. "Senior flight attendant, Susan Mitchell. Discriminatory behavior, insulting passengers, mocking academic titles, intentional neglect of service, abuse of authority, openly belittling customers inside the cabin." A vice president cleared his throat, trying to interrupt. "Dr. Carter, perhaps this was just an isolated incident." Olivia looked straight into the camera. "Do you think I sat in seat 32B just to observe one isolated incident?" The man froze, his eyes flickering like someone who suddenly realized he was the one about to be interrogated. Olivia turned another page. "Purser Ryan Blake witnessed misconduct, failed to intervene, failed to report, failed to correct his staff, failed to protect the customer, failed to maintain service standards. This is not a mistake. This is cowardice." Ethan swallowed sharply. The vice presidents looked at one another, realizing they were not just in a meeting. They were witnessing a trial, or more accurately, a clinical diagnosis of the airline's internal disease. Olivia placed the notebook down her hands, interlaced her voice, lowering, yet growing more powerful than any shout. "The problem is not 2 employees. The problem is that you created a system where toxicity is tolerated, where silence is rewarded, where employees hold more power than customers. This is not NorthStar's culture. This is a betrayal of my father's legacy." A vice president attempted to defend himself. "We always prioritize efficiency and cost savings." "Customers' cost savings," Olivia interrupted. "The greatest cost is respect. And you threw it out of the aircraft?" No one dared add another word. Olivia turned to Ethan. "You will explain to me why employees with years of repeated complaints are still assigned to flights." Ethan wiped sweat from his brow, struggling to breathe evenly. "They are protected by the union, and the current evaluation system does not document enough behavioral violations." Olivia stared at him with a look that would make any powerful man feel like an intern. "If your evaluation system cannot record behavioral failures, then you have built a broken system from the ground up." She stood. No one moved their chair. "From this moment, NorthStar will change, not with memos, not with presentations, with structure." She walked a few steps across the room, each footstep sounding like a judge's gavel. First, the entire cabin crew, 20,000 employees, will be required to complete a new certification program, the Carter Standard of Dignity. A vice president protested. But 20,000 people, that will take months, and the cost. Olivia turned sharply. You are asking about the cost of not insulting customers. The man immediately fell silent. Second, anyone who fails the certification will retrain. Fail a second time, removed from the flight division. A loud inhale echoed from one corner of the screen. Third, every executive from vice president level upward must fly economy at least 2 flights per quarter. No identity disclosure, no special treatment, no exceptions. Ethan nodded like a man cornered, and finally Olivia looked directly at the CEO. You have 1 year to rebuild the culture. If you cannot, I will find someone who can. Ethan was speechless. He only nodded once, slow, heavy, defeated. Olivia returned to her seat, her voice dropping but not softening. We are not simply repairing an airline. We are restoring its soul, giving pride back to its employees, dignity to its passengers, and honor to the Carter name. She closed her notebook. The meeting ended. And in that instant, everyone in the NorthStar system understood that they had just witnessed the return of a kind of leadership the airline had forgotten for far too long. A leader who does not need to raise her voice for everyone to listen. The morning at the NorthStar Training Center on the outskirts of Washington, D.C., carried an unusual atmosphere, a quiet but pressurized energy, like the stillness right before sunlight breaks through a thick layer of clouds. Olivia stood at the back of the large auditorium, leaning lightly against the last row of seats, still in her gray sweater, still tidy, still composed. No one there knew that the quiet woman watching them was the one who had rewritten all their rules. On stage was Mark Henderson, now the director of in-flight service training. He wore a simple black suit, but his eyes held the authority of someone who had witnessed 2 eras at time, when NorthStar brimmed with pride and the era when it decayed. Today he stood there to open the 3rd era rebirth. Everyone, his voice rose deep, warm. Steady, the uniform you wear does not represent just an airline. It represents a promise. The entire hall went silent. More than 300 flight attendants, rookies and veterans, sat upright. A passenger might step onto your aircraft on the best day of their life or the worst day, and you, with nothing more than a sentence or a glance, can change their entire flight. He scanned the room, row by row. That is responsibility, not privilege. The young attendants' eyes gleamed with hunger. The older ones carried a different expression. Shame, because they knew that for years they had lost what NorthStar used to stand for. Olivia remained at the back, hands folded in front of her. She said nothing, simply observed. She saw everything she hoped for, and everything she feared. Pride was returning, but old wounds were still there, thin and fragile, like early winter ice. The ceremony ended with a long round of applause. Mark bowed and stepped off the stage. The auditorium lights brightened slightly, and the crowd began to move. Voices scattered gently through the room, like small sparks warming the air with renewed belief. A young flight attendant approached Olivia wearing a shy but sincere smile. I am sorry, I am not sure if I should bother you." Olivia turned her gaze calm but not cold. "It is all right. Go ahead." The girl inhaled deeply. "I just want to say thank you. I have heard many stories about tension, about employees being afraid of their own colleagues. But this new program, it makes me feel proud of this job. I know someone stood up to change everything. I just wanted to say thank you for doing that." Olivia looked at her young face, full of hope, untouched by the exhaustion that often crushes people in service jobs. A new generation. A new chapter. "Hold on to that feeling," Olivia said. "It is what will keep NorthStar standing." The girl bowed her head lightly and stepped away, blending into the flow of people heading toward the hallway. Several others glanced at Olivia with a familiar expression, as if unaware of who she was, but sensing her presence was not accidental. Olivia stood alone in the soft light between the rows of seats. The silence after a crowd was always where she thought most clearly. 6 months. Just 6 months. And NorthStar had changed more than it had in a decade. The new culture was not a coat of paint. It was the foundation. But she knew foundations must be inspected often if they were not to collapse again. Her phone vibrated lightly in her pocket. Olivia pulled it out and looked at the screen. Ethan Caldwell had sent a message. "Q2 report is in. Customer satisfaction highest in 10 years. Entire cabin crew sends their thanks. NorthStar is breathing again." A short message, but it warmed her chest. She placed the phone back into her pocket and looked through the large window, where a NorthStar aircraft was accelerating for takeoff. The lights along its fuselage glowed brightly in the early night, like an arrow cutting into the sky. NorthStar had drifted. But now it was flying back on course. She lifted her head slightly. No smile, but her eyes were brighter. She did not need anyone to thank her. She only needed to know her father's promise of dignity, of kindness, of an aviation industry with a heart was returning. A young flight attendant at a distant gate was greeting passengers. She bowed gently, her smile genuine, her eyes warm. A small gesture, but perfectly aligned with the spirit. That was why Olivia did all of this. Not to punish, but to heal. NorthStar was not just an airline. It was proof that culture does not die if someone guards it. Olivia walked out of the auditorium, her shoes tapping softly against the floor. Her silence remained her strongest power, and that power had just placed an entire airline back into the sky where it belonged. NorthStar returned to the sky, but the aftershocks of the incident did not disappear immediately. They spread quietly, seeping through every training center, every meeting room, every red-eye flight. Stories about the passenger in seat 32B became internal legend, whispered in galley kitchens passed down from senior crew to new recruits. No one said the name, but everyone knew. On one flight from Chicago to Seattle, a young flight attendant approached an elderly passenger trembling with anxiety. She gently adjusted his seatbelt and said something so soft only the two of them could hear. That tiny moment was later written into a report by another attendant, not because it was required, but because they believed good things deserve to be seen. That had never happened before. That night, the report went straight into Olivia's inbox. She read it in her small office, where warm yellow light settled over stacks of thick documents. The screen reflected a line. She did it because she wanted to, not because she was told. I think Dr. Carter should know this. Olivia closed her eyes for a second. Not proud, just reassured. She stepped into the hallway where headquarters staff were leaving after a long day. A group of flight attendants who had just finished their training stood near the elevator, laughing quietly. When they saw Olivia pass by, they fell silent for a moment, not out of fear, but because they recognized who was walking past them. One of them gave her a small nod. Olivia returned it with an equally small one, enough to say she acknowledged their effort. No speeches, no introductions. In the new NorthStar, everyone understood that language. Night settled over Dulles Airport. Through the glass, Olivia watched a NorthStar aircraft lift off the runway, its tail light cutting through the mist, drawing a clean, steady line into the sky. Revival was not a glorious victory. It was a quiet, persistent process, repeated every day, and she had pushed the entire system into that trajectory. The elevator doors opened. Mark Henderson stepped out holding a stack of documents from that day's training course. He paused when he saw Olivia. NorthStar may have lost many things, he said slowly, but it never lost the people who truly care. Olivia looked at him, her eyes calm as a dark lake. We just needed to remind them of that. Mark nodded. Right now, they are remembering. She turned back to the window one last time. The aircraft was now only a small dot in the corner of the sky, but its flight path remained straight, steady, unmistakably clear, just like the future she was shaping. Olivia left the building without needing anyone to escort her. Still with that quiet demeanor. Still with those unhurried steps. Still with the calm of someone who knows real power never needs display. In the dark, the only sound left was the rolling wheels of her suitcase against the stone floor, soft yet unwavering, mirroring the journey she had placed the entire airline upon. NorthStar was flying in the right direction, and Olivia Carter was still there, guiding it with the strongest silence a leader could possess. The sky outside the NorthStar New York office window was washed in a pale orange glow, the kind of late afternoon light that brushed against the glass towers like a reminder that everything moves in cycles, glory and decline, culture and people. But today that light shone on a very different NorthStar, quieter, steadier, and stronger. Olivia walked into the high-floor conference room without needing an announcement. The internal meeting had already been underway for a few minutes. Directors were discussing plans to expand new international routes charts and profit forecasts, filling the massive screen. But the moment Olivia stepped through the door, voices softened and gradually faded, as if the room itself remembered its proper order. She did not need to sit immediately. She did not need to gesture. She simply stood at the head of the table, her gaze fixed forward, and the room fell into complete silence. Before we continue, Olivia said, her voice even and sharp, I want to see the latest report from the Ground Truth program. The operations vice president pulled the report onto the screen. These were the flight's executives were required to take as ordinary passengers, no privileges, no priority, no title disclosure. Some flights received positive evaluations. Some did not. Olivia read line by line. Her hands did not move. No one dared breathe too loudly. She stopped at one page. A short, cold note from the chief financial officer, after an economy red-eye from Dallas, read senior flight attendant, displayed impatience with elderly passengers. New hire was scolded for mistakes with no support. Cabin atmosphere tense. Olivia looked up, her eyes cut like diamond. Who oversees this region? Her voice was not loud, but it made every muscle in the room tighten. A regional manager stood his voice, quivering slightly. Dallas-Fort Worth falls under my supervision. Olivia looked at him, not angry, not sarcastic, but so utterly disappointed that the room itself seemed to drop a degree. Why do foundational issues still exist? The man swallowed, trying to steady himself. We are in a transition period. Some of the older managers are not yet familiar with the new standards. This is not about being familiar or unfamiliar. Olivia interrupted, her voice slicing cleanly. This is a matter of leadership competence. Silence flooded the room. No one dared argue. She continued, her voice lowered but heavier than a fist pounding the table. If managers cannot uphold the new culture, they do not have a place at NorthStar. The manager lowered his head. Olivia did not look back at him. She looked at the whole room, at every face, realizing the cleansing process was far from over. You do not report to me with numbers. You report with behavior. I gave you tools. I gave you the road map. But if you cannot protect the culture, then every beautiful metric you present becomes meaningless. She sat clasping her hands together on the table. Her voice slowed but gained the weight of stone. I did not rebuild NorthStar for it to sink back into the same mud. One repeated misconduct is a warning. The second is a choice. And the third is an ending. Hands tightened under the table, not out of fear of her, but fear of what her words meant. Olivia continued, tomorrow the entire Dallas region retrains. The regional manager is suspended until he completes the new leadership program, and every behavior report for the next month will be sent directly to me. The Vice President of Human Resources nodded quickly, taking notes, as if every word was a military order. Olivia ended the meeting with a sentence that made it clear the momentum of change had not slowed. NorthStar is moving forward. If anyone cannot keep up, they will step aside. She stood and left the conference room. No one spoke until the door fully closed behind her. Olivia walked down the glass corridor, the sunset washing her silhouette in muted shades of amber. She felt no triumph, no pride, only responsibility. The responsibility to ensure her father's promise would never be betrayed again. Outside, a NorthStar aircraft took off its engines, roaring strong and steady. A reminder that culture, like an airplane, only stays on course when the person guiding it never loses focus. Olivia paused at the window, watching the aircraft climb into the darkening sky. Silent, steady, in absolute control. That silence was the spine of NorthStar, and Olivia Carter was still the one with her hand on the invisible yoke, guiding the entire airline. The sky outside the window of the NorthStar office in New York was painted in a soft shade of orange, the late daylight brushing the glass towers like a reminder that everything moves in cycles, glory and decline, culture and people. But today that light shone on a very different NorthStar, calmer, aligned and stronger. Olivia stood alone in the empty conference room after the hours-long meeting had finally ended. The light streaming through the tall glass panels cast pale golden streaks across the dark wood floor, stretching her silhouette into a long line of silence. The room was wide, but it did not feel empty. It felt as if it was holding its breath, waiting for her to decide the next step. And there she stood, carrying the weight of an entire reborn airline, one still waiting to be led further. The system-wide audit meeting for Dallas was not the end. It was only one piece of the larger transformation she had set in motion. The latest ground truth reports showed powerful progress spreading through the company, but pockets of resistance still existed, like hidden infections inside a healing body. Olivia understood deeply that cultural reform was never simple. It was not a decision, it was a war. A war against old habits, against complacency, against the inertia of a worn-out system. She knew she might be seen as too strict, too cold, too uncompromising. But that uncompromising focus was the only thing that had pulled NorthStar back from collapse. She walked out of the room, her heels striking the marble hallway in quiet but resonant beats. Every step had purpose, neither slow nor rushed. That rhythm was a silent declaration that the new culture would not retreat, would not waver, would not negotiate. When the elevator opened, a group of employees passing by stepped aside quickly. A young woman bowed her head politely, her eyes filled with respect, not for the title but for the person. Olivia returned the gesture with a small nod, enough to let the girl know she had been seen. Small reactions like that, nods, glances, acknowledgements were the fuel of a healthy culture. Respect begins from small things, and decay spreads from the same place. Leaving headquarters, Olivia stepped into the cold breeze of an early New York evening. The city pulsed like a living organism that never slept. Car lights stretched into bright lines along the avenue. Yellow taxis weaved through crowds, footsteps mixed with laughter from the nearby restaurants. The entire city carried a strange energy, chaotic yet rhythmic, noisy yet coherent. It resembled NorthStar at this moment, moving, adjusting, rediscovering itself. Olivia's driver opened the car door, but she did not get in immediately. She watched the traffic, the darkening sky, thinking about the journey the airline had taken to reach this point. She remembered her father, Raymond Carter, the man who believed every passenger deserved respect, regardless of fair clothing or skin color. The crew is the heart of the airline, he used to say. If the heart does not beat correctly, the entire system dies. And for years after he passed, that heart had lost its rhythm. Olivia had witnessed it with the honest, cold eyes of an analyst, but she chose not to stand aside. She chose to step onto the front line. That war began the moment Susan Mitchell laughed at her boarding pass. A small moment, a seemingly harmless gesture, but powerful enough to expose an entire broken system. Olivia got into the car, the soft leather seat wrapping around her like a warm tide. Outside was the rush of wind and shifting lights. Inside was absolute stillness, the familiar quiet of someone accustomed to making decisions that change systems. Her phone vibrated. A new email from the Cultural Oversight Team. Monthly report complaints decreased 47%. Compliments increased 63%. Previously weak regions improving the fastest. Note: Dallas sends appreciation for the retraining program. Olivia read it without expression, but the reflection of streetlights softened slightly in her eyes. The final two words made her pause. Thank you. Not thank you, Dr. Carter. Not praise. Just a simple thank you without address, as if sent to the very values she was defending. She set the phone down. The car crossed a bridge, the lights reflecting on the ink-black water below in broken golden strips. The image reminded her of NorthStar's flight paths, the routes connecting hundreds of cities and thousands of lives. And she understood that every decision she made shaped not only the fate of a few employees or one airport, but the experience of millions. She remembered the faces of ordinary passengers, the elderly children, busy families, exhausted business travelers, people who wanted nothing more than a decent flight. She remembered Grace, the young flight attendant, trembling after being scolded by a colleague. She remembered Mark's eyes when he bowed his head to apologize on behalf of a failing system. She remembered everything, not to grieve, but to keep herself from ever accepting complacency. The car stopped in front of her high-rise apartment. Olivia stepped out and let the clean night air settle around her. A security guard bowed in greeting. She returned the nod and walked through the lobby. The tower rose above her, its white lights arranged like a constellation placed into perfect order. She crossed the lobby to the private elevator. When the doors closed, the mirrored walls reflected her image, strong, quiet, steady. No jewelry, no symbols of power, only presence. When the elevator opened on the top floor, Olivia stepped into her familiar space. The apartment was wide, minimal, not flashy but full of gravity. The glass wall overlooked the city like a living film, trains, cars, restaurants, lives all moving below. She stood before the window hands on the wooden table edge, breathing slowly. NorthStar had travelled halfway. The other half still awaited. She knew she would not retreat. She would not slow. She would not compromise. Because this was not the battle of a CEO, not the incident of one flight attendant, not the story of one flight. This was a family's oath, a father's promise, and the commitment of the daughter who carried that legacy with both her heart and her quiet, cutting resolve. In the distance, a NorthStar aircraft ascended into the sky, its lights piercing the darkness, drawing a strong, unwavering line across the night. Olivia watched until it became a tiny dot. Then she tilted her head slightly. No smile, but a rare warmth flickered in her eyes. NorthStar was flying in the right direction, and she, with her silent authority, remained the one holding the invisible yoke, guiding the entire sky. From the perspective of an organizational culture expert, NorthStar's journey reveals an unchanging truth. A company can climb through technology and profit, but it can only endure through dignity and respect. The mistakes of a few individuals do not merely reflect who they are, they expose deep fractures within the system. And sometimes it takes someone with the steadiness, clarity, and silent sharpness of Olivia Carter to pull an entire organization back onto its rightful path. If this story resonates with you, like and subscribe to continue following the journeys that expose injustice and restore integrity in the real world. And leave a short comment. Keep dignity.